This is Demi Burchett's 1.2 Muscular System assignment. In this video, we are going to be covering the main functions of the muscular system, different characteristics of the muscles, the three main types of muscle tissue and their roles, the major muscles in the body and their functions, the muscle contractions in terms of antagonistic pairs, and the different muscle fibers. So today we're going to be discussing the different muscles within the body and how they contribute to forming the muscular system. An example of a person who would require to know the muscular system would be a physiotherapist. This is because their role is to enable individuals to improve their mobility so they can function accordingly to their lifestyle. This is whether they are participating in a certain sport or just carrying out everyday tasks. They could be helping strengthen a particular muscle after an injury like a muscle sprain, and help the individual to promote recovery and give them exercises that will reduce the risk of the injury happening again. This is why it is vital that they know about the different muscle groups and so they understand the right methods to relieve pain and improve overall circulation to the muscles. Here on the screen we have a few facts about the muscular system. It is made up of over 600 muscles in the body, which means they make up around half the body weight of an individual. This is why they're so important in enabling the body to perform the functions which we will come to shortly. The idea also that they are discrete organs. This is because the muscles consist of skeletal muscle tissue, tendons, nerves and blood vessels in order to allow movement, circulation and neurotransmission of nerves to the different types of muscle tissue. And lastly, myology is the more advanced term to describe the study of the muscular system, which is what we are going to try to do today. This moves us nicely on to the main functions of the muscular system. As you can see on the screen, there are 6 main types that the muscles create in our bodies to allow us to perform everyday tasks and participate in our different sports. However, they also help in a range of other ways to the different muscle fibers, which we will come to later on in the video, and help them by playing different roles to help these functions. One of the most important functions of the muscles is that they allow the movement of the axial and appendicular skeleton. The process in which this occurs is through the central nervous system, which is formed by the spinal cord and the brain. This requires our bodies having to tell our brain to move a particular muscle, which means it is voluntary because it is under our conscious control. So we have to tell it to contract or relax depending on the movement we are trying to achieve. This happens by a sensory neuron which takes the impulses to the brain and then sends the impulse to the spinal cord, which is then taken to the muscles by the motor neurons. These muscles are then innervated by the central nervous system. However, there are times when we don't have to tell ourselves to move our muscles, and this is in our reflexes. An example of this is if we put our hand over a fire, our pain reflexes would detect the stimulus and move our hand away because we feel it getting hot. This is why our sensory organs are vital in detecting a stimulus in order to send the impulse to move the muscle. The main reason why we are able to move is because of the skeletal muscles. It is important to note that muscles cannot push and only pull. This is because they are connected to the tendons which connect these muscles to the bones, which allows them to act as levers to produce movement over an articulation or joint. In order to perform motion, it requires the muscles to work together with the skeletal system to provide movement and locomotion. This can be either in terms of basic movements, like the process of breathing, or moving an appendage, for example in sports like swimming, which requires the legs and muscles of the arm to work together to remain coordinated to allow the swimmer to glide through the water to complete the race in the fastest time. Next, we have the ability to maintain posture. This occurs due to the muscles contracting constantly by partial contractions in order to sustain the anatomical and erect position. It occurs in the muscles in the back of the trunk, which are the trapezius, latissimus dorsi, and also the help of the pelvic muscles. These are constantly contracting to enable the body to sustain an upright position. Also, the abdominals help in maintaining posture, and the stronger your core is and the muscles of the back, it is easier to stabilize the body in exercise so we can maintain position. It is also very important in protecting the spine so it is not easily damaged, and so it can remain supported when performing complex movements to remain stable and suspended in the body. It is also key that the skeletal muscles are flexible, because stiff and weak muscles can throw off an athlete's alignment and cause injuries like dislocations. This is particularly relevant in sports like weightlifting, because the weightlifters would need strong and flexible muscles in order to lift the effort or weight above their head. They would need their alignment and posture to be balanced in order to maintain the position and reduce the risk of damaging these muscles by the downwards force of gravity. It would also be relevant because they don't want to sustain a long-term injury that would require regular physio or even breaks from their sport. Another function of the muscular system is that it enables respiration to take place in the body. Specifically, the intercostal muscles help to elevate the rib cage by pulling on the diaphragm, which ultimately expands the thoracic cavity by drawing the lungs downwards and outwards. This allows a higher volume of oxygen to diffuse into the lungs and waste products like carbon dioxide to diffuse out. This makes gaseous exchange more efficient and effective. This is particularly important in sport because our muscles are contracting constantly. Therefore, they require highly oxygenated blood in order to gain energy by working aerobically. Aerobically is working with oxygen. So aerobic sports that require oxygen, like marathon running, would require this process to repeat constantly in order to aid the muscles with their demand for oxygen. This is so they can continue to function for the long durations that aerobic sports tend to last for, without fatiguing, and to not produce waste products like lactic acid, which could cause injuries like cramps and muscle strains. This process is, however, involuntary, which means it is not under our conscious control. We don't have to tell ourselves to breathe, but some of the muscles require innervation by the central nervous system because they are voluntary, so they can function. At rest, exhalation, which is breathing out, requires the muscles to perform little movement, so they are passive. But during active activity, the rate of breathing increases, and so does the depth of breathing. This is why we need the intercostal muscles and diaphragm to increase the air pressure and the abdominal muscles to push the internal organs upwards to provide a large internal volume during inhalation. We would also need a large external volume during exhalation in order to maximise the carbon dioxide leaving the body, along with the waste products. Another function of the muscular system is thermoregulation. This is inevitably the maintaining of body temperature. Our bodies are a negative feedback mechanism, which means we want to keep at an optimum temperature at all times. We have thermoreceptors within our bodies which try to monitor the temperature levels and respond to sudden drops or rises to control and sustain it. As the muscles contract, they are producing heat, and as they relax, they lose some of that heat by the process of sweating. Because our temperature reaches a point where it is too hot, so we have to release some of that heat out of the body. When we take part in strenuous exercise, our body temperature increases so much that we need to lose some of the heat, as I was saying, and this happens by the sweat glands in the body, particularly the ones on the skin. And so the heat has to travel through the bloodstream to the skin, where it can evaporate out of the sweat glands to reduce the temperature to allow us to cool down. This is why in sports we advise participants to warm up and cool down in order to reduce the risk of injury and allow the muscles to warm up and cool down after exercise. It is similar in cold conditions. When we shiver, the muscles are contracting to try to generate more heat to raise our temperature higher. So sports like skiing which take place in cold conditions at high altitudes, would require the skier to wear appropriate clothing and keep their muscles warm, because otherwise their body heat could drop too low and they could be at risk of experiencing hypothermia. Similarly, in hot countries, sports like volleyball, the player's temperature is more likely to increase, so they would need to release the excess heat by sweating and drinking lots of water in order to reduce the risk of developing hyperthermia and heat stroke. The constriction of organs is another key function. The smooth muscle types, which are found in the inner walls of the vessels of the capillaries and arterioles, role is to maintain the blood flow by vasoconstriction to narrow the internal lumen to stop blood flowing, and vasodilation to dilate the lumen to allow the blood to flow through. This process allows a person's hypertension to be controlled and increase it when it is lower than it should be, and control the volume of blood travelling to the different tissues. The smooth muscles, which we will come to later, are involuntary and use a sympathetic nervous system to contract. This involves a neuron that connects with the myofibril, or muscle, in the blood vessels to secrete adrenaline to constrict the internal lumen. Another way that we can narrow the blood vessels to restrict the blood flow is by the secretion of a hormone known as vasopressin. For example, if the body is resting, less blood flow will be required to the muscles because they are inactive. However, the organs like the digestive system would require vasodilation to increase the blood flow because they need the energy in order to break down the food. But however, this is reversed during exercise because our muscles become active and need the demand for oxygen, and our systems like the digestive system are not working at their maximum. On the other hand, vasodilation works by trying to stop vasoconstricting signals and the production of nitric oxide, which will produce intracellular signals within the cells. The vasoconstriction of blood vessels help to maintain the temperature by aiding thermoregulation. This is relevant for athletes, specifically ice skaters and speed skaters in the cold environments, would require these vessels to contract, specifically the ones exposing the skin surface, as they will need to slow the metabolism to keep the muscles working and sustain a temperature where they are kept warm. A physiotherapist would use vasoconstriction to heal some sports injuries. An example of this is cold therapy, which allows the blood vessels to constrict to reduce blood flow and therefore relieve pain to that muscle. And finally, another important role is to allow the heart to contract, so it can take the oxygenated blood at high pressure around the body. The cardiac muscle in the myocardium allows the heart to work involuntarily to allow the heart to beat continuously and powerfully, so it can maintain the rhythm to eject the blood at high pressure from the left ventricle to the rest of the body by the electrochemical signals sent via the synovial node. This inevitably is the pacemaker that is made up of cardiac fibres in the right atrium and generates the electrical impulses to tell the heart to contract. When at rest, the heart is still contracting, but the cardiac output, which is the rate at which blood is pumped, is much slower, roughly around 5 litres per minute. Whereas, when exercising, the heart is forced to beat faster by the sympathetic nerves in order to eject more oxygenated blood around the body and collect the deoxygenated blood to transport it out of the body. All sports require the heart to pump blood, as we need it to survive in everyday tasks. But high-intensity athletes like sprinters will require the heart to eject more blood at a faster rate in order to meet the demand of the muscles, particularly in the quadricep and hamstring groups of the legs, to provide them with the ATP needed in order to function powerfully.